Joe.
You've all really depressed me, actually. Okay, so I've got two questions. First of all, it seems like the answer might be to sort of throw democracy at the problem, that if we had a more democratic and accountable EU, that might help things. But is democracy always necessarily, is it always the answer? I mean, for example, there's a reason why we have certain institutions isolated from public influence, like the central banks, for example. I mean, if people are given complete control democratically, I'm going to sound like a horrible elitist bastard here, but bear with me. If you're given if you're told to raise taxes to pay for things, services, I mean, the public tends to vote for lower taxes, and yet they still want things that you pay for the taxes with. Look, I'm thinking of California here, for example. So my argument is democracy always necessarily good, or are there certain things, especially economics, where you just have to
I have to isolate that video from what you just said, and I'm going to use it as you're the guilty party. I think you proved my case. You almost sounded like you were despising democracy there.
No, I don't. I don't despise democracy at all. But
you said people get things wrong.
Yes, they do. But you don't think they do? No, but yes. But you don't think.
I know. Everyone in Brussels is very intelligent.
Right.
Knows better than the rest of us. But we are the people.
But if we have what is essentially, if you say that the EU is in large part regulating cross-border transfers of trade and economics, it's doing things which people aren't, which is boring, which people don't pay attention to, and which you might, which are vital for sort of the economy of Europe. Do you think that opening up democratic control over essentially a regulatory body is a good idea?
Yes.
Before the panel answers, so let me just get three brief questions, comments from the gentleman there and there.
I'd like to just, on the democracy point, we live in a representative democracy. We vote for people that are specialist politicians because they deal with things that are tremendously complicated.
Have you met politicians?
Well, perhaps I'm living in a bubble, perhaps I'm deluded.
Yes.
We live in a representative democracy, economics, finance, these things are tremendously complicated, and the reality is that most people in this country do not understand the complexities of it. That is a mere statement of fact. If we did not live in a representative democracy, and we had everything by referendum, which might be what you're suggesting, we would live in utter chaos. Utter chaos.
I would put another problem of democracy that I think will be more appealing to Paul, is that when you create an institution, move an institution from being non-democratic, following a very strict mandate, overseen by someone else that is democratic, and you make that new institution suddenly graduate into democracy, that institution takes on a legitimacy it didn't used to have. And I think we'd probably have a lot less trouble with Europe if Europe was properly intergovernmental and less democratic, in a sense. The European Parliament produces the worst kind of stuff that comes out of this EU, if you ask me. And that's because it's democratic.
I mean, on the same page, the UK versus EU democracy. I mean, on the EU system, you have effectively a sort of civil service which creates legislation. It then has to go through two houses. It has to go through the Parliament, and it has to go through the member states, who are indeed themselves representatively elected. So that's one system. The Parliament decides its agenda. Yeah, it comes out with all sorts of stuff, and then the member states say no, 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 and occasionally something gets through. The UK, we again have a civil service. We have one House of Parliament that's elected, the other one that's nominated by politicians, in a rather strange process. But bizarrely, the Parliament can't control its agenda. The agenda of the UK Parliament is largely controlled by the government. So you have this really quite strange system in this country. And it's why, I mean, to me, having talked to people in both systems, I find the EU system is more democratic than the UK system, because the UK system has many people as prescribed. It's an elected dictatorship. You know, you have your majority. You can do almost anything else apart from the people who've been nominated or inherited the rights if we take them out.
Right, and then briefly from Bruno.
Just on your point, so there, your arguments are exactly the arguments that are mounted against the 1832 Reform Act. And the reason why people argue for a property qualification for the vote was that a property holder was someone who understood the law by definition. They were a business, they were a proper person. They went out and did stuff.
And the landowner.
Or rest of your argument is entirely the same as that. I think you have to go back to what Matt was saying, is that over the last 20 years, particularly since the Treaty of Maastricht, reflecting national developments in this country as much as anything else, the EU has done a lot more. It's been far more political in terms of the important issues of the day. And have they got it right? Is there an alternative? Is there an alternative to what's happened with Ireland? Is there an alternative to the Eurozone or the Euro? Is there an alternative to the EU on the basis of European cooperation? There probably is. So let's have a discussion about that. Is there an alternative to the way that the British political system operates and its constitution? Yes, most definitely. The British civil service is overwhelmingly important. The reason why the EU has become so important is because of the dominance of civil services in all the European countries and the dominance of bureaucratic, risk-averse kind of outlook. So my last question would be to all the panelists is what one reform would they make?
And that ends it now. So everybody answers this question, and we're moving on to the coffee break.
I'd unilaterally tear up the treaty and see what Europe did. We'd still like to trade with you guys. We'll even go along with a lot of standards that make sense. But forget the rest of it.
Despite my elitist tendencies, the one thing I do is have some kind of Europe-wide poll on what the hell the people want the EU to be, because they've never been asked, and nobody really knows what the EU is for. So you ask the people, get a bit of democracy in there at the start, saying, what do you want the EU to do, what should the EU be for, and then that's where you get your answer from, because currently nobody really knows what it does, what it's for, where it's going, anything.
Choice question.
Tricky one. I wouldn't want to answer 7 questions. But, rather than asking in or out, ask, what is it?
I would probably go back to the drawing board and trying to do something with the Larkin conclusions, the Larkin Declaration, which said that we need to bring the EU closer to the people. The declaration was great. The Lisbon Treaty that followed from that declaration was awful. So let's go back to that declaration, and this time let's really try to bring the EU closer to people, which would include strengthening national parliament, because I think that's the source of true democracy, apart from the occasional referendum.
Right, thank you very much for the wonderful discussion. Firstly, thank you to the audience, and foremost, thank you to the panelists. We now move on to a brief coffee break. Right? I got it right. And then we're going to have the second panel about